On June 18th, what began as a routine appearance outside a Miami immigration court quickly spiraled into a national spectacle. Cuban-American singer Janette Koreah, known for her fervent support of former President Donald Trump and his hardline immigration policies, was caught on camera breaking down in tears. Her husband, a long-term resident of the United States and the quiet pillar of their family life, was unexpectedly detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) officers. The viral footage of Koreah crying out in anguish, shouting that her husband had done everything right, has since ignited a firestorm across social and political circles. The incident is more than just a personal tragedy. It is a powerful and painful reflection of how policy can shatter lives, even those who once believed they stood on the right side of it. ICE's new approach, detentions inside and outside the courtroom, and ambush in plain sight. Koreah's husband was not attempting to hide. He wasn't undocumented in the typical sense that often dominates public perception. He had complied with the legal processes expected of him, including court appointments and administrative check-ins. But during what was meant to be a procedural court appearance, ICE agents, reportedly dressed in civilian clothes, were lying in wait. As soon as the case was administratively closed, they arrested him in the hallway. This is part of a growing pattern in Miami and other high-traffic immigration cities. Legal advocates say ICE has increasingly resorted to these types of arrests, technically legal, but deeply troubling. These tactics are especially disturbing because they circumvent the protections typically afforded during courtroom proceedings and exploit the moment when individuals least expect enforcement. Others caught in the sweep. The Koreah family was not alone. On that same day, at least 8 others were arrested under similar circumstances. One of the most notable cases involved Julio David Perez Rodriguez, a 22-year-old who had just completed an asylum hearing. Despite being tied to the same petition that granted legal protection to his mother, Rodriguez was also taken into custody. His story mirrors the same cruel contradiction at the heart of Koreah's husband's case: compliance rewarded with detention. Legal justification vs. moral dilemma. The thin line, technically legal, morally alarming under federal law. ICE is allowed to make arrests in public spaces, including courthouse lobbies and hallways. However, legal experts argue that the spirit of justice is being violated. Courtrooms should be sanctuaries of due process, not arenas for ambush. When the rule of law becomes a snare rather than a safeguard, it threatens the foundational trust that immigrant communities and society at large place in the system. Worse still, these arrests often occur without warning, without the chance to consult lawyers or even say goodbye to loved ones. Janette Koreah's husband was taken before she could hug him or speak a final word. It was, as she sobbed later, an act of betrayal by the system I believed in. Human cost. From political supporter to victim, the irony is palpable. Koreah had built her musical brand partly on her public embrace of conservative policies, including immigration enforcement. Yet when enforcement came knocking on her own door, the devastating impact was no less severe than for those she once seemed to politically oppose. "He's not a criminal. He's a worker. He's a father," she cried to reporters, her anguish exposing the raw emotional cost of policies she once championed. A community reacts. Advocacy, outrage, and fear. Legal advocates speak out. Immigration attorneys across Miami have begun sounding the alarm about what they describe as legal entrapment. They argue that individuals who show up for court appearances, believing they are acting in good faith, are being punished for complying with the system. This not only undermines legal proceedings, but disincentivizes future cooperation from other immigrants. Mobilization of community support. In the days following the viral video, local community organizations have rallied around Koreah and others affected by the surge in ICE activity. Emergency legal aid, public awareness campaigns, and protest demonstrations are beginning to take shape. Koreah herself, despite her political leanings, has become a symbolic figure in the immigration debate, a reminder that no one is immune from the system's harshness. A divided public response. Public reactions to the incident have been sharply divided. Some see Koreah's experience as a comeuppance, while others view her as a victim of a broken system. What's undeniable is the emotional resonance of her pain, which has transcended party lines to provoke difficult conversations about justice, family, and what it means to enforce the law humanely. Broader implications. The weaponization of court spaces. Courtrooms as traps. The strategic use of courtrooms as enforcement zones marks a significant shift in ICE's operational methods. Advocates argue that these tactics effectively weaponize what should be a neutral space. Immigrants seeking justice or clarity from the legal system may now view participation as a risk rather than a remedy. Undermining due process by targeting individuals immediately after court decisions, often dismissals or continuances, ICE circumvents the very processes meant to determine whether someone should be deported in the first place. It's a loophole being exploited in plain sight, with grave consequences for due process and procedural fairness. Fear and avoidance, these methods have sown fear in immigrant communities. Many now avoid court altogether, which only increases the likelihood of default judgments and deportation orders. Ironically, ICE's approach may worsen the very problems it claims to address, namely, noncompliance and legal abscondment. The political angle. Cracks in a divided landscape. A policy reinstated. The enforcement spike in Miami comes on the heels of a reinstated policy that targets individuals who entered the U.S. after 2021, regardless of their current compliance status. Though the Biden administration had previously rolled back some Trump-era enforcement mechanisms, this reversal shows that the political pendulum can swing abruptly, and with life-altering consequences. Janette Koreah, a political symbol in flux, now finds herself at a crossroads. Her political identity as a pro-Trump immigrant is colliding with her lived experience as the spouse of a detainee. It is unclear whether her ordeal will reshape her views or deepen her resolve, but the spotlight now follows her not for her music, but for her personal tragedy. A renewed call for reform, the events have intensified calls for comprehensive immigration reform. Lawmakers, activists, and faith leaders are once again pushing for solutions that balance security with humanity. The Koreah case is already being cited in policy debates as a cautionary tale of overreach and unintended consequences. Looking ahead, can compassion coexist with enforcement? Establishing protected spaces, one of the most urgent demands emerging from this crisis is the call to designate certain spaces, like courts, hospitals, and schools, as enforcement-free zones. Advocates argue that this would allow immigrants to engage with critical institutions without fear of arrest, thereby strengthening community trust and legal compliance. Elevating human dignity more than ever, there's a need to apply discretion with a lens of compassion. Many of those detained have no criminal record, pay taxes, and contribute to society. If enforcement is to serve justice, it must also recognize humanity. The path forward. The Koreah family's nightmare may not be over, but their ordeal has sparked a vital conversation. It forces us to ask, what is the cost of immigration enforcement when the very people who uphold its ideals fall victim to its excesses? Conclusion. A heartbreak that transcends politics. Janette Koreah's story is a sobering reminder that immigration policy is not merely theoretical. It touches lives, splits families, and tests the limits of our legal and moral frameworks. Whether you support strict enforcement or call for leniency and reform, the human toll of these policies cannot be ignored. In a nation built by immigrants, perhaps the most important question we must now ask is not whether we can enforce the law, but whether we can do so without losing our soul.